Well, we are finally here. A little while ago, I had said that to prepare for The Last Jedi, I wanted to review every single film that was written and directed by The Last Jedi director Rian Johnson, and we are finally at the end with the 2002 neo-noir science fiction film that put the name Rian Johnson on the map, Looper. Looper takes place in 2044 in Kansas, and 30 years in the future, time travel will be invented, but it will be immediately outlawed, and it will only be able to be used by the highest of the crime syndicates. And because the tracking systems in the future make it near impossible to dispose of a body, the mob has found a workaround for it. What they do is they use the time machines and send the targets back into the past, where a specialized assassin called Loopers wait for the target, kill them, and then dispose of the body, leaving no evidence whatsoever. And why are they called Loopers? It's because the crime syndicates don't want any evidence of the crime to exist whatsoever. So, if a Looper is still alive 30 years in the future or so, they will be sent back for their younger self to execute them without them knowing that it's actually them, officially closing the loop. The main story revolves around a young Looper named Joe. One day his older self is sent back for him to execute, but he is actually unable to, so it's basically a race against time to find his older self and kill him. So I am pretty excited to talk about Joe, who is played by both Joseph Gordon-Levitt as the younger version and Bruce Willis as the older version. And first off, we all know that Joseph Gordon-Levitt is going to bring it in no matter where he is, because he's just that great an actor. I'm honestly surprised that he hasn't gotten an Oscar on his mantle yet. But one thing about the film that was definitely risky was the fact that they, to make him look more like a younger Bruce Willis, they actually used makeup, and Gordon-Levitt also had to, adopt the facial tics and a few mannerisms of Willis. And you know what? It's hardly noticeable, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt actually does a great job being a younger Bruce Willis, basically. I mean, he even did that thing where Willis just kind of squints one eye and kind of puffs out his lips, like this. And it's not in a funny way that he was doing an impression. It was more like it was his own facial tics. And he also kind of speaks like Willis does in some ways. And speaking of Willis, a little bit after he was in M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable, he basically phoned in every performance, basically playing himself. That is, until Looper, where he gives the best performance since Unbreakable. Now, without giving any spoilers, Willis's version of Joe does have a purpose in the film. He didn't just escape because he doesn't want to die. Something happens in the future that he believes that he can fix by going into the past. And I mainly say that because, from my synopsis, you may just think it's a normal, find this person and kill them before something bad happens, but the story actually delves way further than that. And just as a shout out, Emily Blunt is in the movie, and she's always really good. I think that the most impressive part of Looper is the story. It just feels so original, because a lot of movies kind of adopt that feel of Blade Runner in the way that it looks, and this one doesn't really feel, it just feels way more grounded. And also from a story point, the first half really explores what a looper is, even to the point of showing us what it means to really close a loop, and it's done particularly well with the description of what a looper is, especially because Gordon-Levitt's character is giving about a minute or two of narration from the very beginning to help us better understand what a looper is and also what their world is like. And sometimes it's better to show rather than tell, but I actually think that it worked out better by them telling us. And then for the second half, I'm not going to tell you about, because the stuff that happens in the second act is really special. This is something that you need to watch for yourself. And while time travel is important to this world and the story, Johnson doesn't focus on it a lot, and I was actually very impressed with that. Instead, he uses the time travel to build up the concept of what's going on, and then ushers it to the background in order to display the multidimensional characters that he's written, as well as the story that's unfolding in front of our eyes. Rewatching the film to review it, which, by the way, I've watched the film many, many times. I even watched it opening weekend with my mother back when I was in high school, and I noticed one thing that I never really noticed, and it's kind of, I guess you can kind of consider it a theme, and this film is sort of, it's sort of an existential thriller, because both of these versions of Joe just see each other as just a couple of assholes. So you see both of them as they're going through this conflict trying to change the other. Younger Joe seeing what he will become, and older Joe seeing, you know, who he used to be. And both do want to change the other, but for the better. And the film brilliantly asks if humans can truly change, not just our past and what we've done, but who we are as people and who we will become. And Johnson knows that to make this movie fun, you actually have to put fun into it. And I know that I mentioned earlier about the whole Blade Runner thing. You know, a lot of movies that are set in the future kind of want to look like Blade Runner, but this does feel more grounded. Yeah, sure, it feels realistic and futuristic, where the wage gap between the two classes, you know, rich and poor, appears basically astronomical, and the city is very dirty, and sometimes it lacks true personality. But we do get those few moments where it goes away from the city, and you just see sunlight, you see the plains of Kansas, and it doesn't really feel like any kind of movie set in the future that I've ever seen. And of course, because Rian Johnson is a huge film nerd, especially for classic films, he definitely gives off that feel in this film, just like he did with his original film Brick, which I gave 5 reels because that movie's amazing. And I definitely feel a few elements of slightly more modern films like Witness and Terminator. Now, there are only a couple of issues with the film, which is more of a nitpick for me, but it doesn't really hurt my enjoyment of the film. It's just something that I do have to mention. And it happens with every time travel movie, and it's just that some parts of the story do get a little confusing, and yeah, it's really not an issue, but I do have to point that out. And now that we're at the end of this review, I have to take some time, just a little bit of time, to praise this movie, because out of all the movies that I've seen that have come out in the past 2 decades, this is one of the most original films I've ever seen from these 2 decades. And I saw this back when it opened up in the theater back in high school, and I loved it then, and I love it even more now. This was my introduction to Rian Johnson, and the reason why I lost my goddamn mind when I heard that he was directing The Last Jedi, and even more when it was recently announced that he would be helming a new Star Wars trilogy. I mean, come on, this is a great time to be a Star Wars fan. And it just felt so great watching this movie again, because it reminded me of why I loved film in the first place, and of why I am so extremely excited to see The Last Jedi in one of the greatest theater rooms in the world at 2 a.m. in the morning of December 15th, which is only 23 days from now. And to finally end my Rian Johnson catch-up series, I am giving Looper 4.5 reels. Well, that'll do it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe if you haven't already for more reviews and content. Farewell until the next video. Bye, guys.